The tavern on Nexus Station was always full of strange creatures from across the galaxy. Tonight was no different. Blue-skinned traders from the Andorian colonies sat next to six-armed merchants from the Outer Rim. Everyone drank, everyone talked, and everyone shared stories. But when someone mentioned the name Kethvar the Eternal, the whole place went quiet. An old Zephyrian pilot with gray scales and tired eyes leaned forward at his table. His voice was barely a whisper, but everyone could hear him in the sudden silence. "I saw him once," the pilot said, "on Kepler Prime maybe 20 years ago. He had just finished hunting the last of the crystal beings. Beautiful creatures they were, made of living diamond. They could sing songs that made you cry with joy. Kethvar killed them all in one night." A young trader from Earth, new to this part of space, laughed nervously. "Come on, old man. One guy can't be that dangerous. How big could he be?" The Zephyrian's eyes went wide. 12 feet tall, boy. Maybe more. Black shell-like armor covering his whole body. 6 arms, each one, ending in claws that can cut through steel like paper. And his eyes glow red in the dark like burning coals. The human stopped laughing. Another voice joined in from across the room. This one belonged to a Centauri woman with purple skin and 4 eyes. "My grandmother told me stories about him when I was little. She said he's been hunting for over 1,000 years, maybe longer. No one knows where he came from or what world made such a monster." "Monster is right," said a Martian dock worker with cybernetic arms. "I heard he keeps trophies, skulls and bones from every intelligent species he's ever killed. His ship is like a floating graveyard." The Earth trader looked around the room at all the different faces and species. Fear was written on every one of them. But surely someone has tried to stop him. The Galactic Police? The Federation Navy? The old Zephyrian shook his head sadly. "They tried, boy. Oh, they tried many times. Sent whole fleets after him. Elite soldiers, the best weapons money could buy. None of them ever came back. Kethvar is too smart, too fast, too experienced. He's been perfecting his hunting skills since before most of our civilizations even learned to make fire." "What does he want?" the human asked. "Money? Power? Territory?" "Trophies," the Centauri woman answered. "Just trophies. He hunts because he loves to hunt, because he's good at it, because he can. Every intelligent species in the galaxy has lost people to him, except..." She stopped talking and looked directly at the young human trader. "Except what?" the human asked, though something cold was creeping up his spine. "Except humans," she finished. "You're the only species he hasn't hunted yet. Your people only joined the galactic community 5 years ago. Most of us barely know anything about your home world or your people." The Martian dock worker nodded grimly. "Word is, he's been studying your species, learning about you, waiting for the right opportunity. Kethvar never rushes into a hunt. He plans everything perfectly." Meanwhile, far from the crowded tavern, in the darkness between stars, a massive ship drifted silently through space. The ship was black as the void around it, and its hull was covered with what looked like bones and skulls from 100 different worlds. Inside the ship, in a chamber lit only by the red glow of monitoring screens, something moved in the shadows. Kethvar, the Eternal, stood before a wall covered in trophies. Thousands of skulls stared back at him with empty sockets. Each one represented a different species, a different hunt, a different victory. He had collected them over centuries of perfect hunting. But there was still one empty space on the wall, one species he had not yet claimed. His 6 arms moved with fluid grace as he accessed his ship's computer. Information flowed across the screens in front of him. Data about Earth, about human biology, about their history and culture. What he saw made his mandibles click with amusement. Humans were weak, soft pink skin with no natural armor. No claws, no fangs, no venom. They were slow compared to most species. Their senses were dull. They lived short lives and seemed to spend most of their time fighting each other instead of becoming stronger. "Pathetic," Kethvar said in a voice like grinding stone. "How did such weak creatures even survive on their own world?" He continued reading. Earth was classified as a death world by galactic standards. Dangerous weather, deadly creatures, unstable geology. Most species would consider it uninhabitable. But somehow humans had not just survived there, they had thrived. They had even made it their mission to protect and preserve the other life forms on their dangerous planet. Foolish sentimentality, Kethvar decided. They waste their energy caring for lesser creatures instead of becoming perfect predators themselves. He studied images of humans going about their daily lives. They looked so ordinary, so harmless. Nothing like the great warriors he had faced from other worlds. Nothing like the armored battle beasts of Titan 7 or the telepathic hunters of the Vega system. Those had at least provided some challenge before he killed them. His computer chimed softly. New information was coming in from his network of spies and informants throughout the galaxy. Kethvar read the message and his red eyes glowed brighter with interest. A human freighter pilot named Jake Collins had just accepted a solo cargo run to the mining colony on Kepler 442b. The job would take him through the Meridian asteroid field, one of the most isolated regions of space. 3 weeks from the nearest inhabited system, 3 weeks from any help. Kethvar studied the data about this human. Collins was older than most freight pilots, maybe 40 standard years. Former military, according to his records, but that meant little. Human military forces were considered barely adequate by galactic standards. He lived alone, worked alone, and seemed to prefer dangerous cargo runs that other pilots avoided. Perfect, Kethvar whispered. He began making preparations immediately. His hunting gear was cleaned and sharpened. His ship's weapons were tested and calibrated. Most importantly, he reviewed his collection of hunting techniques, choosing the ones that would work best against this new type of prey. Kethvar had studied the hunting methods of every species he had ever killed. He knew how to track like a Vegan shadow stalker, how to be patient like a Rigelian stone cat, how to strike with the speed of a Centauri lightning serpent. Over 1,000 years of hunting had made him the perfect predator. But as he prepared for his hunt, Kethvar made the same mistake that had doomed countless predators throughout history. He assumed that his prey would behave like all the others. He assumed that when faced with a perfect killer, this human would run, hide, and eventually die in terror like so many before him. He had no way of knowing that Jake Collins had survived 3 tours of duty in some of the most dangerous places on Earth. He had no way of knowing that humans had a saying about cornered animals being the most dangerous. Most importantly, he had no way of knowing that humans were not just another species to be hunted. They were the species that had turned hunting into an art form on one of the most dangerous worlds in the galaxy. In 3 days, Jake Collins would begin his cargo run to Kepler 442b. In 3 days, Kethvar the Eternal would begin what he thought would be his final hunt. He was right about one thing. It would be his final hunt, just not in the way he expected. Jake Collins sat in the pilot's chair of his freight ship, the Blue Ridge, watching the stars drift past his viewport. He had been flying through space for 6 hours now, and the routine was starting to feel comfortable. The ship's engines hummed. Quietly in the background, a sound that always helped him think. The Blue Ridge was not a pretty ship. She was 30 years old, with scratched metal walls and systems that needed constant repair. But Jake had bought her with his military pension and turned her into his home. Every bolt and wire in the ship had been checked and fixed by his own hands. She might not look like much, but she was reliable. Jake was a big man with graying hair, and hands that showed the scars of hard work. His face had the weathered look of someone who had seen difficult times and survived them. At 42 years old, he had spent half his life in the military and the other half flying cargo through the dangerous parts of space. Most pilots avoided the routes Jake preferred. The Meridian asteroid field was known for destroying ships that got too close to the spinning rocks. Pirates often hid there waiting to attack cargo vessels. The pay was good because the risk was high, and Jake needed the money. In his cargo hold, medical supplies sat in carefully secured containers. Vaccines and antibiotics for the mining families on Kepler 442b. Children were getting sick out there, and these medicines were the only thing that could save them. Jake had made this run 3 times before, and he knew how grateful the colonists would be when he arrived. He checked his navigation computer. 2.5 weeks until he reached the colony. The route would take him through the deepest part of the asteroid field, far from any traveled space lanes. It was lonely work, but Jake preferred it that way. After 20 years of taking orders and following commands, he enjoyed the quiet independence of running his own ship. The communication system beeped softly. Jake frowned and checked the display. There were no scheduled check-ins for another day, and he was too far from any station to receive normal traffic. He pressed the button to accept the incoming signal. Static filled the cabin for a moment, then cleared to reveal an image that made Jake's blood run cold. The face on his screen was not human. It was something from a nightmare. Black shell-like skin-covered features that seemed designed for killing. 6 arms moved in the background, each one ending in claws that looked sharp enough to cut through steel. But it was the eyes that made Jake's stomach turn. They glowed red like fire, and they stared at him with the patience of something that had lived far too long. "Greetings, human," the creature said in a voice like grinding metal. "I am Kethvar the Eternal. You may have heard of me." Jake's military training kicked in immediately. He reached for the weapon locker under his console while keeping his face calm and neutral. "Can't say that I have. What can I do for you?" The creature's mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement. "Your species is new to this galaxy, so your ignorance is understandable. I am a hunter, human, the greatest hunter in the universe. For over 1,000 years I have tracked and killed the finest specimens from every intelligent species among the stars." Jake's hand found the grip of his pistol. The weapon felt small and useless against something that looked like it could tear apart his ship with its bare claws. "Congratulations. Still not sure what that has to do with me." "Everything, I am afraid," Kethvar replied. "You see, I have collected trophies from every species in the galaxy. Every species except one. Humans remain the final entry in my collection, and you have the honor of filling that gap." Jake felt something cold settle in his chest. It was not fear exactly. It was the same feeling he had experienced in the mountains of Afghanistan when enemy fighters had surrounded his unit. The calm that came before violence. The quiet acceptance that death was close and would have to be faced on its own terms. "Well," Jake said slowly, "that's unfortunate for you because I'm not planning on dying today." Kethvar's laugh was like breaking glass. "They all say that, human. The Arcturian battle lords said it. The Vegan shadow dancers said it. The crystal beings of Kepler Prime said it. They are all dead now, and their skulls decorate the walls of my ship." As if summoned by his words, the space around Jake's freighter began to shimmer and twist. A massive vessel materialized out of nothing, its cloaking field deactivating to reveal a ship that belonged in a museum of horrors. The hull was black, as space itself, but covered with what looked like bones and skulls from 100 different worlds. It was 3 times the size of Jake's freighter and bristled with weapons. "Impressive, is it not?" Kethvar asked. "Each trophy represents a perfect hunt, a life taken at the moment of greatest terror and desperation. Your skull will join them soon, human." Jake stared at the massive ship and felt his military instincts analyzing the situation. He was outgunned, outnumbered, and trapped in the middle of an asteroid field with nowhere to run. Any normal person would be begging for mercy right now. Instead, Jake found himself getting angry. "You know what?" Jake said, his voice getting harder. "I've dealt with bullies before. Usually they're not as ugly as you, but the principle is the same." The alien hunter's red eyes flared brighter. "Insults will not save you, human, but they will make your death more painful." Jake watched as Kethvar's ship moved closer. Weapon. Ports were opening along its hull, preparing to disable his engines. The alien was not trying to destroy him completely. He wanted Jake alive for the hunt. "I will give you 1 full rotation of your planet to prepare yourself." Kethvar continued. 24 of your hours. Use this time wisely. Pray to whatever primitive gods your species worships. Make peace with your short life. When the time is over, I will board your vessel, and the hunt will begin." "And if I refuse to play your game?" Jake asked. "Then I will simply blast your ship apart and take your skull from the wreckage. It will be less satisfying but still acceptable. The choice is yours, human." Jake looked around his small cabin. The Blue Ridge was not a warship. She had a few basic defensive systems and Jake's personal weapons, but nothing that could stand against a vessel designed for hunting and killing. In a straight fight, he would last maybe 30 seconds, but Jake Collins had not survived 3 tours in Afghanistan by fighting straight fights. 24 hours? Jake asked. 24 of your hours, Kethvar confirmed. Then I guess we have a deal. The alien hunter's image smiled, showing rows of sharp teeth. Excellent. I do so enjoy prey that accepts its fate with dignity. It makes the hunt more satisfying. The communication ended, and Jake was alone in his cabin again. Outside, his viewport, Kethvar's ship held position like a patient spider waiting for its web to trap a fly. Jake could see smaller craft launching from the larger vessel, probably to set up a perimeter and make sure he could not escape. Jake sat back in his pilot's chair and closed his eyes for a moment. 24 hours to prepare for a fight against the greatest hunter in the galaxy. Most people would spend that time in panic or despair. Jake spent it thinking. He had been in hopeless situations before, surrounded by enemies, cut off from help, facing odds that should have killed him. The secret was not to think about winning or losing. The secret was to think about making the other guy pay as high a price as possible. Jake opened his eyes and began making a list of everything on his ship that could be turned into a weapon. The medical supplies in his cargo hold contained some interesting chemicals. His toolkit had items that could be modified for combat. Most importantly, he knew every inch of his ship better than anyone else in the universe. Kethvar might be the greatest hunter in the galaxy, but he had never hunted a human before. He had never faced someone who had learned to fight on Earth, where everything was trying to kill you and survival meant being meaner and more stubborn than anything else on the planet. Jake Collins smiled for the first time since the alien had contacted him. It was not a pleasant smile. "All right, you ugly bastard," he said to the empty cabin. "Let's see what you've got." Jake Collins had 18 hours left when he finished turning his freight ship into a death trap. The cargo hold looked completely normal from the entrance. Medical supply containers sat in neat rows, just like they had when he left Earth. But Jake had spent the last 6 hours changing everything. Under the floor plates, he had rigged motion sensors connected to his ship's internal communication system. Anyone walking through the cargo bay would trigger silent alarms that would tell Jake exactly where they were. Between the supply containers, Jake had strung nearly invisible wire at neck height. The wire was thin enough that most people would not see it in dim light, but strong enough to trip or strangle someone moving too fast. He had learned this trick from insurgents in Afghanistan, who had used similar traps against his unit. The lighting system had been modified too. Jake could now control every light on the ship from his portable tablet. He could make sections go dark or blind an intruder with sudden brightness. In a fight against something with better natural weapons, controlling what the enemy could see might make the difference between life and death. But the cargo hold was just the beginning. Jake had worked his way through every room on the Blue Ridge, turning his home into a maze of nasty surprises. The galley now had a pressurized tank of cooking oil connected to the ventilation system. With the press of a button, Jake could fill any room with slippery, blinding spray. The medical bay had been rigged with tear gas canisters taken from his emergency supplies. Most importantly, Jake had studied the layout of his own ship like a battlefield commander planning a defense. He knew every vent, every crawl space, every hidden corner where a man could hide or move without being seen. Jake was not a big ship, but she had plenty of places for someone who knew her secrets. In his cabin, Jake opened his weapons locker and laid out everything he owned that could hurt someone. His military sidearm, a reliable pistol that had never let him down, a shotgun he kept for emergencies, a plasma cutter from his toolkit that could slice through metal, various knives and tools that could serve as weapons in close combat. It was not much against a 12-foot alien killing machine, but Jake had learned long ago that the best weapon was often the one your enemy did not expect. He checked his tablet and reviewed the motion sensor data from the cargo hold. Everything was working perfectly. When Kethvar came aboard, Jake would know where he was at all times. That knowledge might be the only advantage a human could have against a creature that had been hunting for 1,000 years. Jake sat down at his small table and opened his ship's computer. For the next 2 hours, he did something that none of Kethavar's previous victims had ever thought to do. He researched his hunter. The galactic data networks contained scattered reports about Kethavar going back centuries. Most of the information was fragmentary, but Jake was used to putting together intelligence from incomplete sources. Slowly, a picture began to form. Kethavar was old, possibly ancient by human standards. He had been hunting intelligent beings since before humans discovered fire. He was strong, fast, and nearly indestructible. His natural armor could stop most weapons, and his 6 arms gave him advantages in close combat that few creatures could match. But Jake was not looking for Kethavar's strengths. He was looking for patterns, habits, and weaknesses. The reports showed that Kethavar preferred to hunt alone. He liked to board his victim's ship and stalk them through familiar territory, turning their own home into a hunting ground. He was patient, often taking hours or even days to complete a hunt. Most importantly, he was arrogant. Every report mentioned how Kethavar would talk to his victims, explaining how superior he was before killing them. Jake smiled grimly. Arrogance was a weakness he could use. He found records of 3 different military operations that had tried to capture or kill Kethavar. All had failed, but Jake read through the after-action reports with professional interest. The alien hunter was smart and adaptable, but he followed certain patterns. He always disabled his target's engines first to prevent escape. He always gave his victims time to panic and make mistakes. He always boarded through the main airlock like a gentleman instead of blasting his way in. That last detail was important. It meant Kethavar had rules he followed, traditions that were more important to him than efficiency. Those traditions might get him killed. Jake spent another hour studying the medical data about Kethavar's species. The information was limited, but it suggested that despite his armor-like skin, the alien had vulnerable spots. The joints between his shell plates, the eyes that glowed so dramatically, the breathing apparatus that allowed him to survive in different atmospheres. Most creatures, no matter how dangerous, had weak points if you knew where to look. With 12 hours left, Jake began working on his most important project. In the ship's small workshop, he started building something that did not appear in any military manual. It was part weapon, part trap, and part desperate gamble. Jake took apart his plasma cutter and rebuilt it with parts from the ship's power systems. The new device would only work once, but it would deliver enough energy to cut through almost anything. He connected it to a remote trigger that he could activate from anywhere on the ship. The hardest part was deciding where to place it. Jake walked through his ship again, thinking like both hunter and prey. Where would Kethavar expect to corner him? Where would the alien feel most confident and least cautious? The answer was obvious. The bridge. Every ship's captain made their last stand on the bridge. It was where Kethavar would expect to find his terrified victim, begging for mercy. Jake installed his improvised weapon under the pilot's console, aimed at the exact spot where someone standing in the bridge's center would be most vulnerable. When the time came, he would lure Kethavar into position and trigger the device. If it worked, the fight would be over instantly. If it failed, Jake would be dead a few seconds later. With 8 hours left, Jake ate his last meal. Military rations heated in the galley microwave, the same food he had eaten in combat zones across Earth. The familiar taste helped calm his nerves and focus his mind. He spent the next 2 hours in meditation, a practice he had learned from a Buddhist monk in Tibet during a peacekeeping mission. Jake was not a religious man, but he understood the value of mental preparation before battle. Fear could kill you faster than any weapon if you let it control your actions. As he meditated, Jake thought about the people depending on him. The sick children on Kepler 442b, who needed the medical supplies in his cargo hold. The colonists who were counting on him to deliver their medicine on schedule. If he died here, they would suffer and possibly die while waiting for help that would never come. That thought made him angry, and anger was better than fear. With 4 hours left, Jake recorded a message on his ship's computer. If he died, at least someone might learn from his experience. He explained everything he had discovered about Kethavar, every weakness he had found, every pattern he had identified. Future victims might have a better chance if they knew what they were facing. But Jake did not plan to become a victim. He had survived too much and seen too many good people die to give up now. With 2 hours left, Jake put on his old military combat gear, body armor that had stopped bullets in 3 different wars, boots that had carried him through deserts and mountains and jungles. The familiar weight of his equipment made him feel ready for what was coming. He checked his weapons one final time, made sure all his traps were armed and ready, and settled into his favorite hiding spot in the ship's ventilation system. From here he could move quickly to any part of the Blue Ridge without being seen. From here he could watch Kethvar enter his ship and begin what the alien thought would be an easy hunt. Jake Collins closed his eyes and waited. In 30 minutes, the greatest hunter in the galaxy would come aboard. In 30 minutes, Kethvar would discover that humans were not like his previous prey. In 30 minutes, the real hunt would begin. And for the first time in over 1,000 years, Kethvar the Eternal was going to find out what it felt like to be the one being hunted. The sound of metal hitting metal echoed through the Blue Ridge as Kethvar docked his personal hunting craft to Jake's airlock. From his hiding place in the ventilation system above the cargo bay, Jake watched through a small maintenance camera. As the airlock began to cycle open, 24 hours had passed exactly. Kethvar was nothing if not precise. The airlock finished its cycle with a soft hiss, and Jake got his first real look at the creature that had terrorized the galaxy for over 1,000 years. Kethvar was even bigger than the communication screen had shown. 12 feet of black armored shell and razor-sharp claws filled the airlock doorway. His 6 arms moved with fluid grace as he examined the interior of Jake's ship, but it was the way he moved that told Jake the most about his enemy. Kethvar entered the ship like he owned it. No caution, no checking for traps, no concern about potential danger. He walked into the cargo bay like a king entering his throne room. That arrogance was going to get him killed. Jake watched silently as Kethvar moved between the medical supply containers, his red eyes scanning the shadows for signs of his prey. The alien's thermal sensors were probably picking up Jake's heat signature from the ventilation system, but the ducts carried warm air from the ship's engines, making it difficult to get an exact location. Kethvar stopped in the center of the cargo bay and spoke in his grinding voice. "Human, I know you are here. I can smell your fear. It would be more dignified if you came out and faced your death like a warrior." Jake smiled grimly in his hiding place. Let the alien think he was dealing with a terrified victim. Every second that Kethvar spent talking was another second for Jake to study his movements and plan his attack. The alien hunter began walking forward again, his claws clicking against the metal floor. He was moving toward the front of the ship, following the path that would take him to the bridge. Just like Jake had predicted, when Kethvar reached the first tripwire, Jake was ready. The wire caught the alien across his lower legs, but instead of tripping him, it simply snapped. Kethvar was too heavy and his reflexes too fast for such a simple trap. But the wire served its real purpose. It triggered the motion sensors that Jake had hidden under the floor. Immediately, Jake's tablet lit up with information about Kethvar's exact position. The alien was standing 3 feet from the wall facing forward, with his back to the ventilation grate that Jake was hiding behind. Jake drew his plasma cutter and quietly opened the grate. He had one chance to get this right. The beam of superheated energy struck Kethvar in the back, exactly where Jake had aimed for a joint between the alien's armor plates. The hunter's roar of pain and rage shook the entire ship as he spun around, looking for his attacker. But Jake was already gone, crawling through the ventilation system toward his next position. Behind him, he could hear Kethvar smashing containers and cursing in several different languages. "Clever human," Kethvar called out. "You managed to wound me. That has not happened in over 3 centuries. But now you have made me angry, and an angry hunter is a dangerous hunter." Jake reached another grate and looked down into the ship's main corridor. Kethvar was moving more carefully now, checking corners and watching the ceiling. The wound on his back was bleeding some kind of yellow fluid, but it did not seem to be slowing him down much. Jake triggered another trap. The lights in the corridor suddenly went out, plunging Kethvar into complete darkness. At the same time, Jake activated the pressurized cooking oil system he had rigged in the galley. The alien's night vision was excellent, but it could not penetrate the cloud of oil spray that suddenly filled the air. Cathvar stumbled and cursed as his feet slipped on the suddenly slick floor. Jake dropped down through the grate behind him. This time he used his military sidearm, emptying the entire clip into the back of Cathvar's legs where the armor looked thinnest. Most of the bullets bounced off harmlessly, but a few found gaps in the alien's natural protection. Cathvar spun around with inhuman speed, his claws slashing through the air where Jake had been standing. But the human had already rolled away and disappeared into the darkness. "Stop hiding like a coward," Cathvar snarled. "Face me in honorable combat." Jake's voice came from the ship's communication system, echoing from speakers throughout the corridor. "Honor is something you earn, not something you demand. You want to talk about cowards? Let's talk about someone who picks on people weaker than himself for 1,000 years. Cathvar's red eyes flared brighter with rage. He began moving, forward again, but more slowly now. The alien was learning to be cautious. Jake triggered his next trap when Cathvar entered the medical bay. Tear gas canisters hidden in the walls began releasing their contents into the air. The gas was designed to incapacitate humans, but Jake was gambling that it would at least irritate an alien's breathing system. He was right. Cathvar began coughing and stumbling, his 6 arms waving frantically to clear the air around his face. Jake took advantage of the confusion to hit him with his shotgun, aiming for the alien's eyes. The blast caught Cathvar in the side of the head, cracking one of his eye lenses and sending him staggering into the wall. Yellow blood streamed down his face as he roared with pain and fury. "You dare damage my eyes?" Cathvar screamed. "I will make your death last for days. I will keep you alive while I remove your limbs one by one." "You'll have to catch me first," Jake replied over the intercom. Thav, alien hunter, charged forward blindly, smashing through the medical bay door and into the main corridor. But Jake was no longer there. He had moved to a new position while Cathvar was distracted by the tear gas. For the next hour, Jake led Cathvar through a deadly game of cat and mouse. He used every trap he had prepared, every advantage he could think of. He hit the alien with improvised explosives made from medical supplies. He used the ship's artificial gravity to throw Cathvar off balance at crucial moments. He filled sections of the ship with toxic gases and blinding smoke, but Cathvar was adapting to Jake's tactics. The ancient hunter had not survived for 1,000 years by being stupid. He began anticipating Jake's traps, moving more carefully, using his superior senses to track his prey despite all the distractions. Slowly but steadily, Cathvar was driving Jake toward the front of the ship, toward the bridge where the human would eventually have to make his last stand. Jake knew he was running out of options. His traps were exhausted, his ammunition was nearly gone, and Cathvar was still very much alive despite multiple wounds. The alien's natural armor and healing abilities were keeping him in the fight even as yellow blood leaked from a dozen different injuries. But Jake had one last surprise waiting. As Cathvar entered the corridor leading to the bridge, Jake triggered his final trap. The section of floor that the alien was standing on suddenly gave way, dropping him 10 feet into the ship's lower maintenance area. Jake did not wait to see if the fall had injured his enemy. He ran for the bridge as fast as his legs could carry him. Behind him, he could hear Cathvar climbing back up through the hole in the floor, cursing and promising horrible revenge. Jake reached the bridge and sealed the door behind him. It would not stop Cathvar for long, but it would give him a few precious seconds to prepare for the final confrontation. He moved to the exact center of the bridge, directly over the spot where he had hidden his most powerful weapon. The improvised plasma cannon was armed and ready, aimed at the exact position where Cathvar would be standing when he entered the room. Jake drew his last weapon, a combat knife that had saved his life in Afghanistan. It was a pitiful thing compared to Cathvar's claws, but it was all he had left. The bridge door exploded inward as Cathvar smashed through it with his bare hands. The alien hunter stepped into the room, his red eyes blazing with hatred and his claws dripping with Jake's blood where they had scratched him during their chase. "Nowhere left to run, human," Cathvar said. "Time to die." Jake smiled and held up the remote trigger for his hidden weapon. "Actually, time for you to learn something about humans." What could a pathetic creature like you possibly teach me? Jake's smile grew wider. That we don't hunt for sport. We hunt to survive. And when we're cornered, we become something else entirely. He pressed the button. The plasma cannon hidden under the bridge console fired directly up at Kethvar's chest, delivering enough energy to melt through a ship's hull. For a moment, Jake thought he had won. Then Kethvar laughed. The alien hunter's armor had absorbed most of the blast, though it had cracked and blackened across his chest. He was wounded, possibly badly, but he was still very much alive. Impressive, human. You have given me a better hunt than I have enjoyed in centuries. But now it ends. Kethvar raised his claws for the killing blow. Jake gripped his knife and prepared to make his last stand. The real fight was about to begin. Jake Collins held his combat knife steady as Kethvar raised his 6-clawed arms for the killing blow. The alien hunter's red eyes blazed with triumph, certain that his 1,000-year reign of terror would continue with one more trophy added to his collection. But Jake was not looking at Kethvar's claws. He was looking at something behind the alien hunter, something that Kethvar had not noticed in his eagerness to finish the fight. You know what the difference is between you and me? Jake asked, his voice calm despite the certain death looming over him. Kethvar paused, his claws inches from Jake's throat. Enlighten me, human. You hunt because you enjoy killing. I fight because I have people depending on me. Jake pressed a small button on his belt. Immediately, every light on the bridge went out except for the emergency lighting. But more importantly, the ship's artificial gravity shut down completely. In the sudden weightlessness, Kethvar found himself floating helplessly in the air. His massive body, perfectly adapted for hunting on solid ground, became a liability in zero gravity. His 6 arms flailed uselessly as he tried to grab onto something for leverage. Jake, who had trained extensively in zero-gravity combat during his military service, pushed off from the floor and sailed directly at the floating alien. His knife found the gap in Kethvar's armor where the plasma blast had cracked the shell across his chest. The blade sank deep into alien flesh, and Kethvar's scream of pain shook the entire ship. Yellow blood sprayed across the bridge as Jake twisted the knife and pushed deeper. But Kethvar was not finished. Even wounded and floating helplessly, the ancient hunter managed to grab Jake with 2 of his arms. His claws dug into the human's, shoulders drawing blood and eliciting a grunt of pain. If I die, human, you die with me, Kethvar snarled. Jake looked into the alien's burning red eyes and smiled. That's fine by me, but you're forgetting something important. What? I don't have to kill you myself. Jake reached over and grabbed the emergency airlock control that he had positioned within reach of the pilot's chair. With one quick motion, he activated the system that would blow the bridge's emergency hatch and vent the entire compartment into space. Warning sirens began blaring throughout the ship as the airlock sequence initiated. They had 30 seconds before the hatch would blow, and everything on the bridge would be sucked out into the vacuum of space. Kethvar's eyes went wide with understanding. You are insane, human. This will kill us both. Maybe, Jake replied. But I'm wearing an emergency spacesuit under my clothes. You're not. It was true. Before the fight began, Jake had put on the thin emergency suit that all freight pilots carried. It would not protect him for long in open space, but it might keep him alive long enough for his ship's automated systems to reseal the breach. Kethvar realized the trap he had fallen into. In his arrogance, he had assumed that his prey would never be willing to risk his own life to win the fight. The alien hunter had never faced someone who valued other lives more than his own. 20 seconds until the hatch blew. Kethvar released Jake and tried desperately to reach the airlock controls to stop the sequence, but in zero gravity, with his wounds bleeding and his natural coordination disrupted, he could not move fast enough. Jake grabbed onto a support beam and held on tight. This is for every innocent person you've killed, he said. 10 seconds. Kethvar made one final desperate attempt to kill Jake before the airlock opened. His claws swept through the air toward the human's throat, but Jake ducked and the strike missed by inches. 5 seconds. The ancient hunter's red eyes filled with something Jake had never expected to see there. Fear. For the first time in over 1,000 years, Kethvar the Eternal was afraid of dying. 0. The emergency hatch exploded outward with tremendous force. The bridge's atmosphere rushed out into space in a roaring wind that carried everything loose along with it. Kethvar, still floating helplessly, in zero gravity, was sucked toward the opening with irresistible force. At the last second, the alien hunter managed to grab onto the edge of the hatch with 2 of his claws. He hung there in the rushing wind, his massive body half in and half out of the ship, fighting desperately against the vacuum that was trying to claim him. "Human," he gasped in the thin air. "Help me. I will spare your life. I will leave your species alone. I swear it by the ancient codes of my people." Jake held onto his support beam with one hand and looked at the creature who had terrorized the galaxy for centuries. Kethvar was wounded, desperate, and completely at his mercy. All Jake had to do was reach out and help pull him back into the ship. Instead, Jake drew his sidearm with his free hand. "You want to know what humans are really like?" Jake asked. "We remember our enemies. We remember every innocent life you've taken, and we make sure it never happens again." Jake fired 3 shots into Kethvar's claws where they gripped the hatch frame. The alien's fingers, weakened by the plasma wound and the rushing wind, could not hold on any longer. With a final scream of rage and disbelief, Kethvar the Eternal was pulled out into the cold vacuum of space. Jake watched through the opening as the galaxy's greatest hunter tumbled away into the asteroid field, his body already beginning to freeze in the absolute cold. The emergency systems finally kicked in, sealing the breach with a temporary patch and restoring atmosphere to the bridge. Jake gasped as air rushed back into his lungs and artificial gravity returned to pull him down to the floor. He lay there for several minutes, breathing heavily and checking his wounds. The claws marks on his shoulders were painful but not life-threatening. His emergency suit had protected him from the worst effects of vacuum exposure, though he would have some uncomfortable bruises for weeks. When he finally stood up, Jake walked to the sealed emergency hatch and looked out through the small porthole. Kethvar's body was nowhere to be seen, lost somewhere among the spinning rocks and cosmic debris of the Meridian asteroid field. The greatest hunter in the universe was dead. Jake made his way carefully through his damaged ship, checking systems and making emergency repairs. The Blue Ridge had taken a beating during the fight, but she was still space-worthy. More importantly, the medical supplies in the cargo hold were undamaged. It took him 6 hours to get the engines running again and plot a course for Kepler 442b. As his ship limped through space toward the mining colony, Jake sat in his patched-up pilot's chair and thought about what had happened. He had defeated an enemy that entire fleets could not stop. He had killed a creature that had terrorized the galaxy for over 1,000 years. But Jake did not feel like a hero. He felt tired, hurt, and eager to deliver his cargo to the people who needed it. 3 days later, Jake's ship entered orbit around Kepler 442b. The colonists were grateful beyond words for the medical supplies, and their children would live because of what Jake had brought them. That was all the reward he needed. When Jake finally made it back to civilized space, he found that word of his fight with Kethvar had somehow spread throughout the galaxy. Reporters wanted to interview him. Military leaders wanted to study his tactics. Scientists wanted to examine the remains of Kethvar's ship, which had been found drifting empty in the asteroid field. Jake refused all of them. He filed his delivery report, collected his pay, and took another cargo contract to a dangerous part of space where the money was good and the questions were few. But the story of what had happened spread anyway. Across the galaxy, in taverns and trading posts and spaceports, people began telling a new tale. They spoke of the human freight pilot who had faced the greatest hunter in the universe and won. They spoke of a species that did not hunt for sport, but fought with terrifying determination when their families and friends were threatened. Pirates and raiders began avoiding ships with human crews. Slavers crossed human colonies off their target lists. The criminal organizations that had once ignored Earth's military as primitive and weak suddenly decided that humans were not worth the trouble. And in the furthest reaches of space where the most dangerous predators made their homes, a new understanding began to spread. Humans were not just another prey species to be hunted and killed. They were something far more dangerous. They were the creatures that hunted the hunters. Jake Collins never knew about any of this. He continued flying his routes, delivering cargo to places where other pilots feared to go. He lived quietly, worked hard, and tried not to think about the night when he had killed the monster in the dark. But sometimes late at night when he was alone in space, Jake would remember Kethvar's final words. The alien had sworn by ancient codes that he would spare humanity if Jake saved his life. Jake was glad he had not taken that deal. Some monsters he knew could never be trusted to keep their word. Some monsters had to be put down permanently, and if there were other monsters out there in the dark between the stars, well, they would have to learn the same lesson that Kethvar had learned. Humans did not hunt for sport. They hunted to survive, and they always finished what they started.